Hey, I receive quite a few technical questions on those using a speed light, or very infrequently a studio strobe, as to why, and these are people that are shooting in a shutter priority usually, but people that are adjusting their shutter speed and noticing that their exposure doesn't change, and they're thinking their camera's broken or possibly their speed light is broken. And here's the fact. There are two things that do not have any connection to exposure in these circumstances. ISO, because ISO is not part of the exposure triangle. ISO is applied gain to the captured image, right? Hence, look up the word the ISO invariance on Google. The other thing that does not affect exposure is shutter speed. Oh, what the hell are you talking about, fat tattooed asshole? Shutter speed does not affect exposure. When people release their wild birds, and there's like all these exotic birds flying around South Florida, shutter speed does not affect exposure in flash photography. Why is that the case? Shutter speed affects ambient lighting, but it does not affect flash, speed light, i.e. studio strobe lighting, in most instances. Most speed light, T1 time, that's for 90% of the flash duration to occur, are typically 1/15,000th of a second or less. So it doesn't matter if you've got your shutter speed set at 1/125th of a second or 1/8000th of a second. It doesn't affect anything because speed light and most studio strobe pulses, their T1 time, or 90% of the flash duration, is way faster than your shutter speed. So those people that are actually changing their shutter speed with their speed light and noticing no change and thinking either their speed light's broken or there's like a hot shoe connection error or that their camera's messed up. No, everything's working fine. Shutter speed in flash photography generally is not connected to exposure. Shutter speed affects ambient lighting. You see all this bright light behind me that the sun is emitting off? Yeah, shutter speed only affects ambient lighting. It, in most instances, does not affect speed light or flash strobes. The xenon pulse burst duration is incredibly small. So whether your shutter speed is 1/500th of a second, 1/2000, 1/8000th of a second, or even 1 second, it's like, I'm going to overexpose this. I'm going to drop my shutter speed down to 1 second. Doesn't affect anything. It affects ambient lighting. Now, obviously in the shot, it depends on how much this is key things. Nobody knows anything about this in photography. Lighting ratios. This is why a light meter is so incredibly important. Things that your camera can't calculate and things that you can't calculate are lighting ratios. Lighting ratios meaning the amount of ambient lighting relative to xenon pulse burst lighting, i.e. speed light lighting or studio strobe lighting. So, two things not part of the exposure triangle. ISO, because cameras are ISO invariant. Most of them are anyway. ISO invariance. ISO is not connected to exposure. That's why the actual three legitimate legs of exposure are shutter speed, aperture, i.e. gain and time, gain being aperture, time being shutter speed, and the other one is SNR, signal to noise ratio. Those are the actual, in digital photography, those are the actual three legs of exposure. Gain, time, and SNR, signal to noise ratio. But shutter speed is not connected to exposure with flash photography. Because I keep getting emails from people that are adjusting their shutter speed while using a speed light. It's like, nothing's changing. That's right, that's because your speed light is going, yow! It is way, way, way faster. Doesn't matter what your shutter speed is, the speed light pulse duration is way faster. Technically speaking, in layman's terms, your speed light does not give a shit how fast or slow your shutter speed is because it's going to get in anyway. Like Speedy Gonzales. Yeah. It's a huge difference between ambient lighting, which is controlled by shutter speed, and speed light. Technically specific. You don't have to say speed light or studio strobe. We say xenon pulse lighting. Xenon flash photography. It's not affected by shutter speed. Unless it is a super huge hypersync burst of light that typically averages like 1/800th of a second. Boom! Like a cannon going off. But everybody is not doing hypersync flash photography. Thank you so much for watching. How hot is it? It's hotter than Paris Hilton's thong out here. That's how hot it is. Paris Hilton's thong. It's hotter than that. Goodbye.